Philosophers talk to our times, we citizens of dystopia. I have saved my least favourite dystopia till last. A lifetime of teaching has given me an antipathy and a disbelief of what has become the standard jargon of dystopia, without which I think actually a dystopia is probably impossible. I mean the generational war. I spent 25 years teaching maths to kids. And did the kids change much in 25 years? A bit, not much. I mean, maths GCSE and maths A-level was so crapulously stupid. And then towards the end of my career, under the auspices of Go, which went dementedly cruel, that it probably provoked the same response in kids in the early 90s as it did in the late 2010s. There was no real difference. So my own experience of kids is that different generations don't really exist. Not in the context of maths GCSE. But I know that this flies in the face of modern teachers and our great myth. Now you have to be aware, I have been out of maths teaching now full time for a long time, 8 years. That's long enough for a generation to come and everything to change. Maybe, perhaps, could be, plausibly not. There is a cartoon book that always haunts me when I'm thinking of this, and it's Posy Simmonds. Posy Simmonds contrasted two sets of attitudes in the 90s towards kids. There were old rosy tinted spectacles, where all adults looked upon the scamps of kids and said, and in the end concluded, "You're only the young once," but knew a darker shades. So this was the world of the early 90s. Looked at what kids did and thought they needed ASBOs. They needed monitoring. It was somebody's fault. And beyond that, there is a running joke, which also haunts me, in Bertie Wooster. And one of the running jokes in Bertie Wooster is the same joke as is in Just William. That the adults who condemn the actions of the youth were actually exactly the same when they were kids. There was, therefore, no deep difference between the generations. Oh, there was generational disapproval and "we wouldn't have done it when we were young" and all that jazz. But fundamentally, they were one and the same. And I can remember there's a bit of anthropology, isn't there, about the generation gap. Came in with the invention of the nuclear bomb. I think that's Margaret Mead. And that there was a one-off generation gap sometime around the time of the baby boomers. That this was a generation different. But it would only happen the once, and afterwards we'd all be on the same glorious mind trip. Peace and love, man, or something. Or is it hate and war? I can never quite remember. But in comparison with those kind of early struggles and the punk versus hippie of my day, the modern generational war, which is so necessary for dystopia, is vindictive and impossible and insidious. It isn't at all like The Hunger Games, which has to be said is a dystopic vision I have never watched, or being fairly, I go to sleep during Hollywood films. I find them too boring. Sorry, action movies, they send me to sleep. But that is a classic example of taking an idea that is actually insidious, dangerous, and making it somehow heroic, and not just as it actually is, horrific. Because, of course, what generation wars does is it allows one generation to simply blame the other generation, to feel itself to be apart, to feel itself to be different, to therefore stop any idea of a collective unity, to break any conception that we are actually all in this together. Now, I could give you a long list of different reasons why the West, and I am aware I'm only talking here, as I have in most of this series of the privileged West. I'll do another proper, more anthropological series, Breaking with Dystopia, and looking at how post-imperialism has destroyed our planet. But that is a different series. This dystopic series, I should have pointed at the beginning, was quite Western, because I'm talking about the failure of Western democracies in the face of themselves. And that failure is caught up with this generational war. Because once you stop feeling like you're a nation, once you start feeling there are different generations, crisscrossing, doing different things, then all conceptions of trust, all that basic ability that we all are really caught up together just goes. You're caught up with your generation and the others. Well, they're the others, aren't they? And you get a lovely, lazy way of understanding difference, but and understanding difference as an absolute, a fixed. You're a baby boomer, you're a millennial, you're a Generation Z, and you are my lot, the Generation X that always gets slightly forgotten. As an aside, it's worth remembering that the original reason why Generation X was called Generation X was because advertisers didn't know how to sell things to them. They knew how to sell things to the baby boomers. It's where the letters came from, or at least that's my memory of it from the time, from the early 90s. But of course, once you've created a society that understands itself in terms of irreconcilable differences, what then? First of all, are those differences real? I think it rather depends on how you cut the cake, doesn't it? I've already given you an example. My career as a maths teacher rather suggested to me that there weren't that much difference, really. Certainly between millennials and Generation X's, I taught both in my time. In the beginning of Generation Z's, I noticed the same reluctance to use calculators. The same desire to go on pads, but aware that they were not very good at using visual calculators and making pads do mathematics. The same, therefore, inability to use technology, ironically, to solve maths A-level problems, even when that technology was allowed, which it was most of the time. But the entire exam was presaged on the idea that kids don't like using technology in exams, which I think is probably still quite true. As long as the technology looks a little bit alien and not like a phone, they don't like doing it. It's one of those ironies of teaching life. You have to persuade kids to use their phones to do maths GCSE. So, if you are teaching maths for 20 years, I don't know, 2 or 3 generations, I don't know what changed. To my experience, very little. But it is certainly the case that different economic and technological times do create different sets of attitudes. It is certainly true that the gradual and increased use of computers, which moved from being the programming instruments of my day where you programmed your own games, into the world's library service, into, as they're currently wanting to be, the world's thinking service, absolutely changes how humans understand their brains. Totally. You could, and that bit I think is right. The old skills of being able to look up a map or look it up in a book and actually pull down one of my library books and look when I'm wanting to find a quote, I find glorious. I still find it glorious. I still do it. I still distrust Google Maps over my ability to map read. But I am aware that is to those who are not used to doing it and not used to how it makes your brain feel, will feel terribly, terribly alien and perhaps even a waste of time. But I actually like the way it stimulates my mind. I like the way it makes me think. Now, if you are going to say that there is an inalienable, absolute difference between my joy in maps and my joy in finding quotes by looking them up in books, and the internet generations and the internet generations will never know the joy that I know, I'm going to spit in your eye. Because I'm going to spit in your eye because I don't think that's true. I think that's a failure of teaching. I think that's a failure of demonstrating the difference. What I actually think, you see, is that generational thought is used as an institutionalized form of laziness. It lets every earlier generation off the hook. You just go, well, the youngsters, they're different from us. They're really different. Not, oh, fudge, we forgot to teach them anything. We just assumed that it all bubbled up. It was like American power. It was just God-given, wasn't it? You didn't have to do anything. You could declare war on whatever country you liked and do whatever you liked. In the same way, education just sort of happened. It was done by the state, wasn't it? Well, not really, no. It was meant to be done by you. It was meant to be done by parents. It was meant to be done by uncles and aunts. It was meant to be done by a wider society. And somehow along the line, we've kind of forgotten all of that. We've forgotten how to do it. We've forgotten how to teach how to use books, how to teach how to use maps. Because the joy I feel is a genuine one. And it's a genuine feeling of self-power. And there is no particular reason it couldn't survive computers. Really, I mean it. There isn't a reason. The only reason is that computers offer you the same thing that processed food offers you. Something that is pre-digested, easy, simple. And what you're actually saying is, oh, each generation we're letting them increasingly off the hook, and then we're then laughing at the way they do their brains. That's hardly fair, it's hardly just. Of course, what it allows you to do is to hide other things that are going on here. Which is that the threadbare promise of the cascade wealth cascading down the generations that articulated neoliberalism. The promise at the beginning was always crap. I mean, it just always was. Money never cascades down the generations. It lasts about three generations at most, and then by then it's always gone. It's just the way it is. And one of the things that has happened is that the failure for money to cascade to the generations has been, of course, linked to the gradual siphoning off of money. I mean, into large corporations, into those sorts of organisations that can just quietly take the money in terms of shares, in terms of this, in terms of charges, in terms of that. And so there isn't the money to cascade. And so in the West, one of the things I think that easy assumption of generation does is to hide another inequality, which is that the wealth is not just owned by the old people, the baby boomers, and a little bit now the Generation X, and not by the Generation Z, who actually have a very rough time. It's not just that, it's that there is actually less wealth proportionately to go round, as it is gradually being taken off and used for death duties. It's gradually being corporatized, blended into other things, where all sorts of things that didn't used to cost, like healthcare at age, are now really mattering. And of course, that goes back straight to the generational war. If you don't train your kids how to look after you when you're old, it's no surprise they can't. And then the money shifts and changes. And so what we have done is that we have disguised, I suppose, an entire failure of the fundamental way we ought to understand a society in terms of a generational war. A fundamental failure of passing on knowledge, of persuading people that knowledge really matters, and that actually using your brain as opposed to just using a phone really does matter. It's different. And what it allows you then to do is to effectively use any forms of technology, because you can also do it yourself. It allows you to think about how to do it differently. It gives you flexibility. That failure in the face of technology that was too easy is a major one. And yet we hide it in a notion, into a myth of generational war. And in doing so, totally straddle our society with false divisions. False divisions that are false in the sense that they should never have been there. They're not essential. They're not divisions that actually were ever there, but have become the day-to-day stuff of our thought, as different groups in our society use technology differently, understand things differently, and feel things differently simply because they were never shown how to be one and the same. I mean, this is a bit more of my curmudgeon-y maths teacher phase, but the entire generational war has always deeply saddened me, because it has always felt to me totally counterproductive. A society that understands its divisions in terms of generations is a society that has slipped already into dystopia. It is one of the necessary formulas, I think. And so here we are, with yet another unreconcilable dialectic. One that is totally false, that is designed to be unreconcilable, but to hide other horrid truths that are slipping in. And that, of course, is always the nature of these kind of dystopias. Could we do anything about it? Oh, certainly. Education is always possible. Admitting it isn't like this would be a start. Going back, looking at how kids are learning maths now, looking at how it was learned when you were young, that would be another good way of doing it, because you would see that actually you were just the same. And allows you to understand this basic formula rather differently. But until we all do that, until we actually say, no, there is no such thing as these generations, they're just piffle, they're invented by advertisers, we're a bit screwed. The question is, do we want to stop impaling ourselves on this particular nail, or are we just going to let ourselves wiggle ourselves to death?